Welcome back, Year 10. So, although there is no right or wrong way to plan, I would say that failing to plan is planning to fail, to use a cliche. Without a really solid idea of what you're going to write about, you're likely to spend some time wasting time whilst you try to work out what you're going to do. It doesn't matter if you're a fan of paragraph planning, of bulletproof planning, of mind map planning, or any other method that works for you. Fishbones, skeletons, all of it. What's important is that you do plan something to make sure that you're not going to miss anything. So we're looking at the role of the Victorian gentleman, and we're looking at that role in the extract and the novella as a whole. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by thinking about how Stevenson presents this in the novel as a whole, because obviously I'm going to want to write about Mr. Hyde, which obviously means I'm also going to need to write about Dr. Jekyll, and I'm going to be thinking about the connections between these two, the fact that it's all about that idea of duality. Now obviously duality is one of my key context points, so I'm just going to highlight that in orange now to remind myself. In lots of respects, Dr. Jekyll is a really good example of a Victorian gentleman, except he has some sort of secret past, which seems to be disreputable in some way. Okay, Mr. Hyde is very clearly not a gentleman, and linked to Mr. Hyde you've got Sir Danvers Carew, and we know that Sir Danvers Carew is presented as being a gentleman because he bows when he greets Hyde. He also has a cane. Mr. Hyde carries the cane, which he's then beaten with, which again is like this idea of this anti-gentleman idea. You've also got Dr. Lanyon, who, despite discovering Jekyll's awful secret, vows to keep it a secret. Now within this extract we're obviously going to be focusing on Utterson, and we're going to be focusing on Enfield, but of course we're going to need to think about Utterson down here, and the fact that Utterson continues his duty. So if we now go back to the extract, we've got some ideas down here that are going to help link us. Let's go back to the extract. So we might think about him being introduced as Utterson the lawyer. And when we write about this, we're going to want to make something about the use of the word. We're also going to probably want to talk about the fact that he's described as being eminently human. We know that at this point Utterson is not a gossip. If you remember, he reprimands Enfield later on when Enfield talks about it. We're going to look here about how Utterson lives his life. Now, by using these colours that I've also used in our extract, in my extract analysis, it's going to make it easier for me to know exactly what I'm going to be looking for. So I'm going to be able to flick between the two with relative ease. I'm also going to want to talk about that idea of foreshadowing, that idea that he was the last person with whom those that suffer downfalls were acquainted with, and that is obviously going to be something I can link to Jekyll later on. Enfield here, he's described as being a well-known man about the town. He does, in a way, appear to be a bit of a gossip, and certainly it's this idea of him being a bit of a gossip that links us firstly to Jekyll, but then across to Hyde. So if we're talking about this gentlemanly presentation, we're going to want to talk about how Utterson is being presented compared to how Enfield's being presented, and how each of those compare with what we've got down here. So for me, this is one way that I might consider planning. I'm looking at the links between them. This may or may not work for you. You may prefer a different type of plan. So for example, you might prefer more of a paragraph plan. So for example, you might like to jot down the introduction and what you're going to include in that. I'm really hoping that, there we go. Sorry folks. So the introduction. So we're going to start with a non-negotiable. And if you look back on my channel, you'll be able to find a video where I take you through how to plan a non-negotiable introduction. So you've got your non-negotiable, you know what you're going to include in there. So you're going to need to intro the idea of a Victorian gentleman. That may almost mean explaining or giving a definition of what a gentleman is, and then looking at how that idea is reflected in the novella. Then I'm going to have paragraph number 1. So in paragraph number 1, I'm going to focus very much on Mr. Utterson in the extract. And I'm just going to put my colours here to remind me that I want to look for AO1, AO2, but also AO3. I'm going to link this, so link to presentation of Jekyll in chapter 3, that moment when Jekyll and Utterson discuss the will and Jekyll gets a little bit agitated, and I'm going to look here at making sure I've got AO1 and AO2. I don't think I need to include any more AO3 at that point. My second point, I'm going to go back to my extract and I'm going to look at Mr. Utterson compared to Mr. Enfield, and I'm going to try and make sure that I include my AO1, my AO2 and my AO3. Remember, this colour coding is going to help me select evidence from the example, and then I'm going to link this to the end of chapter 1, when Utterson rebukes Enfield for gossip. My third idea, I want to look at the link between Mr. Utterson, and I'm going to use just the orange here because I want to use that bit at the end, and I'm going to link to chapter 2, story, sorry, the search for Mr. Hyde. And I'm going to look at the way that Mr. Hyde is being presented with a real focus on language here, and how that contradicts the idea of being a gentleman. And then what I want to do is I want to go to chapter 7, and I want to compare Utterson and Enfield to Dr. Jekyll when they meet him at the window, and when they meet him at the window, the way in which he behaves. And so I'm going to need to be looking at including my knowledge and understanding, my language analysis, but also my contextual factors. And remember, we are focusing very much on being a gentleman. And then finally, I need a conclusion where I'm going to sum up my theory and explore my hypothesis. So that's another way that you could do a plan for Jekyll and Hyde. There are lots of other ways, and as we go through, we'll explore a few more of them. Other than that, Year 10, I hope that you're all staying safe and well. I hope you're continuing to follow the government advice. I really hope to see you all soon, and remember, keep washing your hands, folks.